the 1980s. I think it's safe to say that for the past 10 years, American pop culture has been experiencing an 80s resurgence. It's in our music, our fashion, and of course, our cinema. A somewhat overlooked product of this resurgence is the 2014 cult horror movie It Follows, written and directed by David Robert Mitchell. This film doesn't lean as hard into 80s iconography as other media. However, it does fall pretty neatly into the classic 80s formula of suburban teens with shockingly little parental supervision who must take on a supernatural force that threatens their sleepy town. That being said, the way that this film chooses to take on that formula is somewhat unconventional. In this video, I'm going to argue two main points. One, It Follows is a modern take on the suburban fantastic, a genre studies term that was coined by film scholar Angus McFadzean. Two, it does not merely reproduce the conventions and tropes of this subgenre, but actively interrogates and updates them for a contemporary audience. Okay, so what is the suburban fantastic? For the purposes of this essay, I'm going to refer to it as a subgenre that encompasses films which can alternatively fall under horror, science fiction, or fantasy, but share similar settings, subject matter, and other generic conventions. This genre emerged in the 1980s and was pioneered by Steven Spielberg and his company Amblin Entertainment. The popularity of films like E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Gremlins prompted other production companies to produce films with similar characteristics, thus beginning the process of genreification. Let's break it down. The fantastic is a figure that often possesses supernatural qualities, and whose arrival in the suburbs is the catalyst for the central conflict. It can take many forms, but is typically associated with the other. The arrival of the fantastic and the conflict that ensues is paralleled with the internal conflict of the child or teenage protagonist, who is usually, but not always, a white, heterosexual, cisgender, middle-class male. Importantly, the suburbs are typically represented as a safe haven for the child characters, and the fantastic as a force that threatens to upset the status quo. On a surface level, It Follows hits most of the bullet points. It follows a teenager named Jay and her group of friends who live in a suburban community on the outskirts of Detroit. The fantastic element is the sexually transmitted curse, which arrives in the suburbs via an intruding presence, a newcomer named Hugh, who Jay falls for and begins dating. This conflict parallels Jay's personal struggle with her sexuality, as well as her frustration and disillusionment with suburban life. The film clearly draws on its generic predecessors, even including notable iconography like bicycles and TV reruns of old horror movies. However, what I believe sets It Follows apart from its predecessors is the way that it represents the suburbs itself. The landscape in It Follows feels distinctly out of time. I would tentatively place it around the late 2000s, early 2010s, but there are elements of the costuming and set design that seem to defy temporality. In this scene, we see the ill-fated Annie call her parents on a fairly modern-looking cell phone, but then later on we see Yara use this weird e-reader that kind of reminds me of a Tamagotchi, which were popular in the 90s and early 2000s. Jay has this ancient-looking TV in her room, Hugh drives a 70s-era Cadillac, the list goes on. It's not just technology either. The costume design is odd, to say the least. The teenage characters wear clothes that are generally modern looking, but don't really adhere to any trends that would situate them in a specific era. Even weirder, the clothes make it difficult to pinpoint the time of year that this film takes place in. This is literally impossible to ignore once you notice it. Like, why is she wearing heavy socks on the beach? Why is one of them wearing a coat and the other one is in shorts? McFadzean notes that suburban fantastic films often make allusions to the past in order to evoke a sense of nostalgia in adult viewers. Films from the 80s would often make pop culture references to the 1950s, as this was when their adult audiences and creators would have been children. In this sense, It Follows does adhere to the conventions of the genre. However, I don't think it has any intention of courting nostalgia. These temporal anomalies do not so much reflect a fondness for the past, so much as they establish a sense of anxiety and paranoia, the feeling that something is not quite right. Now, I think it's time for some historical context. Here is a very short list of shit that went down in the 80s. The deregulation of corporate interests, the rise of neoconservative rhetoric, backlash against the progress made by feminist, LGBTQ+, anti-racist, and labor movements, the AIDS crisis, during which the American government was directly responsible for the deaths of millions of people, mostly LGBTQ+ people and people of color living in urban centers. It was in this climate that the suburban fantastic subgenre emerged. Although all of the things I just listed are relevant to the formation of the ideology behind these films, I would like to draw particular attention to the neoconservative rhetoric that glorified a particular version of the 1950s small-town America, a time before all those pesky social movements attempted to challenge white supremacy and the heteropatriarchy. A time when white, heterosexual, cisgender, middle-class Americans could feel safe and secure in their all-white suburbs without having to doubt their entitlement to the power and resources that they disproportionately possess. Your Stranger Thingses and Super 8s lean heavily into 80s nostalgia for the same reason that their predecessors relied on 50s nostalgia. They encourage the audience to look through rose-colored glasses at an idealized version of the past that, let's be honest, only ever really existed in the minds of white middle-class Americans and the movies that they created. However, It Follows ditches revisionary nostalgia in favor of a harsher look at suburban life in the early 2010s. It represents the anxieties of a generation of disaffected young people growing up during the years following the 2008 financial crash and the Great Recession. In Occult Anxieties and the Recessionary Imaginary in the Paranormal Activity franchise, author Linda Liu examines another important work of what she calls recessionary horror. In particular, Liu notes that a key aspect of the Paranormal Activity films is the amount of runtime that is dedicated to focusless, drifting dread. Liu links this focusless dread to Gene Komaroff and John L. Komaroff's theory of occult economies, which suggests that late capitalist economies are able to simultaneously create great wealth and extreme income inequality through means that are increasingly inscrutable to the average citizen, and thus take on a supernatural quality. As such, recessionary horror films contain a vague threat that hauntingly manages to be everywhere and nowhere, a hallmark of the free-floating anxiety occasioned by a culture founded on financial debt and the dispassionate, dispersed reign of the market. It Follows makes frequent use of wide shots, often holding them for an extended period of time. This forces the audience to search the screen for a threat without giving them a clear indication of where it might come from, or if there is even anything there to begin with. It is, as Liu describes, simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Another visual motif is the voyeuristic push-in, which is a common shot used in horror movies to create the feeling that the characters are being watched or followed. However, It Follows uses this shot in two different ways. Sometimes it is meant to reflect the actual point of view of the creature. Other times, the creature is not actually present, and the shot is exclusively used for dramatic effect. This sense of never knowing when we're seeing through the creature's eyes is yet another way that the film creates uncertainty in the viewer. The fact that the creature is a shapeshifter and can look like an average person or even someone you know adds to this sense of uncertainty and unease, as does the fact that even when it is on screen, it is frequently out of focus and relegated to the background, forcing the viewer to constantly be on high alert, searching the frame for signs of movement. The suburban environment itself begins to feel threatening, like nowhere is truly safe. These feelings are never really given a catharsis. The suburbs do not go back to being a safe haven by the end of the film. The viewer is left with that sense of uncertainty and unease even after the film is over. In films of this subgenre, the suburban landscape is typically represented as the wholesome realm of property-owning, middle-class Americans. When characters venture outside of their suburban communities, they are exposed to a threatening environment and must find a way to return to the safety of the suburbs. The origin of this trope lies in the history of how the suburbs came into existence. Beginning in the 1930s, the federal government developed a plan to provide housing for white middle-class families while segregating Black people and other people of color into urban housing projects. Developers were contracted to build brand new communities on the outskirts of cities, with the requirement that they would only sell to white people. The Federal Housing Administration, which was founded in 1934, instituted the process of redlining. This essentially meant that they would refuse to mortgage houses in Black neighborhoods, further restricting Black people from property ownership and widening economic inequalities. In his book, The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein writes about a housing development on the outskirts of Detroit, the same area where this film takes place. Developers were required by the FHA to build a 6-foot-high wall, preventing the Black residents of an adjacent neighborhood from entering the all-white suburb. These processes of racial housing segregation are far from over. A study of mortgage lending patterns in Sacramento, California, from the years 1930 to 2004, revealed disproportionately high levels of exploitative subprime loans in majority non-white communities, resulting in higher numbers of property foreclosures. This is all to say that racism is baked into the very fabric of suburbia. It is essential that when we watch these films, we understand that the way that they construct the suburban-urban divide is intrinsically linked to this legacy of white supremacy. It Follows calls attention to this suburban-urban divide when Jay and her friends leave their neighborhood and set off on a journey to track down Hugh in the 8 Mile district of Detroit. During this driving montage, we are shown images that are all too familiar in the recession and post-recession era. Shuttered businesses and abandoned houses marked with graffiti. However, this low-income area is never represented as the source of danger for Jay and her friends. Rather, when their suburban houses and tree-lined streets become unsafe, it is within this urban area that they find temporary safety, answers, and a place to stage their final plan. Compare this to the way that Adventures in Babysitting, a 1987 film directed by Chris Columbus, represents the city.
Chris, I'm begging you, it's really scary here. I've just seen 3 people shoot up, a bald Chinese lady with no pants on, and there's this old guy outside who wants his bedroom slippers.
Get out of my house!
You just moved! Chris, please hurry up and get here.
Brenda, I've got my mom's car. I can't drive it into the city.
Oh my God! There's a man with a gun! Get me the hell out of here!
Even Stranger Things replicates this problematic trope. In one of the only episodes that takes place outside of Hawkins, Eleven ventures into the city and falls in with a dangerous gang of outcasts, whose leader just happens to be one of the few characters of color in the series. Finally, consider this piece of dialogue from It Follows.
When I was a little girl, my parents wouldn't allow me to go south of 8 Mile. And I didn't even know what that meant until I got a little older, and I started realizing that that's where the city started and the suburbs ended. And I used to think about how shitty and weird that was. I mean, I had to ask permission to go to the state fair with my best friend and her parents, only because there's a few blocks past the border.
My mom said the same thing.
I can't help but see this as an intentional reversal of a generic trope that has historically been used to demonize the people and communities that live in urban centers, specifically people of color. In conclusion, It Follows is an excellent example of how to take a critical approach to genre, especially one that is rooted in the ideologies of a certain historical era. Although it certainly has an awareness of generic conventions and a fondness for its predecessors, it doesn't blindly fall into the trap of revisionary nostalgia. Rather, it offers a critique of how the suburban environment functions within these films and updates the formula to address contemporary fears and anxieties.